For hundreds of years, the huge Pacific Ocean has kept many secrets. One of the biggest mysteries is the story of Mu, a continent that some people believe once existed. According to legend, Mu was home to people with great knowledge, beautiful art, and a deep connection with nature, better than anything we know from history books. Some people think Mu was a real place, a center of culture that was destroyed by a terrible disaster, and is now remembered only in old stories and ruins found from Polynesia to the Americas. Others think it's just a symbol made up from the travels, disasters, and shared ideas of many ancient peoples. Whether Mu is fact, fiction, or something in between, the story makes us think about the past and how much of it we really know. What if our civilization started much earlier than we think? What if traces of Mu still affect our world today? Tonight, we'll explore the space between history and legend using science, archaeology, and human curiosity as our guides. Welcome to Deformed History. If you like stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was hidden, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right to you. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. Deep inside you, in every beat of your heart, there is a record of your past, one that might not be completely human. For many years, we've looked at history books, archaeology, and pieces of bone and pottery to understand where we came from. But sometimes a whisper comes through, a suggestion so bold it feels almost impossible, that the blood running through our veins carries traces from somewhere or someone beyond what we know. In the search for humanity's true beginnings, this theory, strange, daring, and stubbornly persistent, refuses to go away. It talks about a mother civilization called Mu, a place so ancient it existed before the ruins of Egypt, the myths of Atlantis, and even the first river valleys of Mesopotamia. Some claim this is where we truly came from. The idea didn't begin in big universities or famous city libraries. It started in the 1800s, in the restless mind of a man named Augustus Le Plongeon. He was an archaeologist, though back then that word meant a mix of adventurer, language expert, and detective. His passion was the Yucatan Peninsula, where thick jungles hid the huge stone cities of the Maya. At the time, most scholars agreed that Egypt was humanity's first great civilization. But Le Plongeon was certain the Maya were older, and that their culture didn't start by itself. As he studied Mayan texts, carved symbols, and painted books, he found something unexpected, references, he believed, to a land that had long ago disappeared beneath the sea. They called it Mu. Le Plongeon's claims were bold enough to upset other scholars. He suggested that the Maya were survivors from Mu, refugees from a terrible disaster that sank their homeland into the ocean. But when people asked him where Mu had been, he couldn't point to it or offer the kind of proof his critics wanted. Without solid evidence, his theory was forgotten and stored away with other legends that dared to challenge accepted beliefs, and there it might have stayed, if another man hadn't stumbled across the whispers and decided they were worth more than a passing thought. His name was James Churchward. He was British, had been a soldier, and was a wanderer by nature. Churchward found himself in India in the late 1800s, far from home and drawn into the complicated world of temples, traditions, and guarded secrets, and one day, he claimed, a high-ranking temple priest took him aside and showed him an object no outsider was supposed to see. From a hidden place came a set of stone tablets, weathered, sun-baked, and surprisingly light, because they were made of a clay-stone mix. Across their surfaces ran lines of detailed symbols, in a language unlike any Churchward had seen before. The priest told him this was the Narkal language, a tongue so ancient that only 2 other people in all of India still understood it. It was, the priest insisted, the language of Mu. Amazed by what he was holding, Churchward made a deal. If the priest would teach him the language, he would help keep the tablets safe from time and weather. The priest agreed, and so began years of careful study, symbol by symbol, until Churchward could read what he believed was the oldest human story ever recorded. What he read, he later wrote, wasn't just a story of kings and wars, but of creation itself. The tablet spoke of the birth of the earth and the rise of a great continent, Mu home to a people called the Nakal. They weren't scattered tribes, but a single united civilization with one government and one faith. Churchward described them as a black race, his words, better in many ways than modern people. Not because of pride, but because of their balanced mastery of life. He painted Mu as a thriving world, with over 64 million people spread across 7 major cities and settlements on distant shores. Huge rivers cut through the land, hills rolled toward the horizon, and plains stretched under a sky that saw the same stars we see now. Though perhaps with different eyes, the heart of the mystery was location. Churchward placed Mu in the Pacific Ocean, stretching east to west from the Marianas to Easter Island, and north to south from Hawaii to Mangaia. By his guess, it was larger than South America. If that seems impossible, remember this was before modern ocean mapping and before we understood how continents move. To his readers in the 1920s, it was a vision both breathtaking and believable. An empire of islands and fertile plains erased from maps but saved in clay. Yet for every wonder in Churchward's story, there was a question that wouldn't go away. If Mu had thrived for tens of thousands of years, where had it gone? His answer was as sudden as it was terrible. Around 12,000 years ago, he wrote, a chain of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes broke the land apart. In a single night, the great continent shattered and sank into the deep, swallowed by 50 million square miles of water. The survivors, those who managed to escape in time, carried pieces of their knowledge to the corners of the earth. From these pieces, new civilizations rose carrying echoes of Mu's language, buildings and myths. To doubters, it was all too convenient, an entire story based on tablets no one else had seen, a disaster so complete it left no trace in the earth. But the appeal of the idea was undeniable. Even as historians rolled their eyes, other researchers and treasure hunters found themselves pulled into the puzzle. In time, Churchward's story would be supported by other discoveries, like the tablets dug up in Mexico by William Niven, whose markings looked strangely similar to the Nakal script. But in those first moments, it was still a single voice telling a story most experts didn't want to hear, and so the legend of Mu stood at a crossroads, half buried in doubt, half lit by fascination. Was it a real place, a cradle of humanity lost to the sea? Or was it a tapestry woven from misread symbols and the dreams of 2 men separated by oceans and decades, but joined in their belief that our past is far stranger than we dare to admit? To walk further into the story is to leave behind the comfort of what we think we know, and to step into a time when the world might have looked very different, and when the first humans, or perhaps something like humans, called a vanished land their home. If the story had ended there, with a single set of tablets in a locked Indian temple, perhaps it would have been dismissed completely, just another colorful myth. But as the years passed, strange pieces began to surface, as if the past itself didn't want to let go of this forgotten chapter. In 1921, decades after Churchward's claimed discovery, a geologist and archaeologist named William Niven was digging in the ground near Mexico City. Niven was used to discovering unexpected things. His career had taken him deep into abandoned mines and overgrown ruins, but what he found here went far beyond gemstones or artifacts. He uncovered over 100 carved stone tablets with surfaces marked with characters in an unknown script. To most people, they were just oddities, perhaps the work of an unknown ancient people. But to Churchward, they were something else entirely. When the 2 men compared notes, Churchward insisted the markings matched the Nakal language he had learned in India, the same script said to come from Mu. If this was true, it suggested a cultural connection between ancient Mexico and a vanished Pacific homeland thousands of miles away, a connection that standard history couldn't explain. Critics demanded a simpler answer: coincidence, misunderstanding, or even lies? And yet the coincidences began to pile up in uncomfortable ways. For those willing to look, the Pacific seemed to hold more than just water and volcanic islands. There were whispers of unnatural structures on the ocean floor, ridges and shapes too sharp and geometric to be created by erosion alone. In a time before deep-sea submarines, such claims were impossible to check, but they lingered, feeding the idea that perhaps Mu's bones still lay beneath the waves. Churchward's most famous piece of physical proof wasn't underwater at all. It stood in plain view on a remote volcanic island, thousands of miles from any major continent. Rapa Nui, known to the outside world as Easter Island. Scattered across its grassy slopes stood the moai, massive stone statues, each with a head much bigger than its body. Their features were carved with an almost stern seriousness. Some weighed over 80 tons. Some towered more than 30 feet into the air. Archaeologists dated their construction between the 13th and 16th centuries, crediting the island's Polynesian people, the Rapa Nui people. The statues, they explained, were built to honor ancestors. But when visitors asked the elders how such huge stones had been moved from the quarry to their resting places around the island, the answers slipped into legend. The statues had walked there. Of course, no serious scholar believed the moai literally strolled across the landscape. The most accepted modern explanation comes from researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, who showed that a coordinated team could rock a statue forward in an upright position using ropes in a way that might look like walking from a distance. Another theory suggested the statues were laid flat on wooden rollers and dragged, a method that, while possible, would have required huge amounts of timber, a resource the island didn't have much of. Churchward had a different answer entirely, that the builders had a kind of lost spiritual or technological power, able to move massive stones without physical force in the way we understand it today. Why such a focus on Easter Island? Because, as Churchward saw it, Rapa Nui lay within the boundaries of where Mu supposedly stood. If the island's people had inherited even pieces of knowledge from a drowned motherland, it might explain not just the statue's size, but the cultural drive to create them. And if that was true, it raised another question. How many other civilizations around the world might carry the fingerprints of Mu hidden in plain sight? That question leads naturally to the pyramids, not just the Great Pyramid of Giza, which dominates the Egyptian desert with mathematical precision that still amazes modern engineers, but the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico and the lesser-known but equally interesting pyramid. Structures in China's Shanxi province, built thousands of years apart in regions, separated by continents and oceans. They share core geometric principles, stepped layers, alignment with compass directions, and huge scale. Mainstream history says these similarities come from separate development, different cultures independently, arriving at the same building solution for ceremonial or political purposes. But to Churchward and to those who found his ideas appealing, the similarities were evidence of a shared origin, a blueprint carried across the globe by survivors of Mu. Here the theories branch into even stranger territory. Some suggest that the pyramids, far from being just tombs or temples, served as energy centers, vast machines using forces we have yet to rediscover. This idea places Mu not only as a cultural motherland, but as the cradle of technological skill, rivaling or even surpassing our own. In such a scenario, the loss of Mu would have been more than a human tragedy. It would have been the erasure of an entire branch of human ability. And then there is the question of who the people of Mu actually were. Churchward described them as human but exceptional, having wisdom and unity that outshone later civilizations. Yet the deeper the conversation went, the more the line between human and something else began to blur. This is where the ancient astronaut idea enters the picture. The idea suggests that beings from beyond Earth visited in the deep past, guiding the development of early humanity. Supporters point to myths and sacred texts across cultures. The Sumerian stories of the Anunnaki, sky beings who came down from the heavens. The Mayan Popol Vuh, which tells of sky gods who created mankind. The Hindu Vedas, which speak of flying craft called Vimanas, piloted by divine figures. Could Mu have been their first landing place, their base for shaping what would become the human race? For those inclined to believe, such thinking cast the Nekal not as ordinary humans, but as hybrids, the children of Earth and extraterrestrial union. In this telling, the story of Mu becomes more than just the rise and fall of a lost continent. It becomes the first chapter in a story of contact, cooperation, and perhaps even conflict between worlds. And if that is true, the disaster that ended Mu might not have been purely geological. It could have been deliberate, an act meant to erase something from the Earth forever. Whether one accepts these ideas or rejects them completely, the effect is the same. The mind drifts to the Pacific, to the idea of a vast land now hidden beneath the waves, and wonders what traces might still lie there. The official maps show nothing but water and scattered islands. But legends have a way of lasting, even when the facts seem thin. And sometimes legends are the last clue left when history itself has been washed away. The Pacific at night is a restless expanse, a black mirror reflecting stars that seem close enough to touch. Somewhere in that vast darkness, Churchward believed, lay the bones of Mu, a continent that had once been a stage for the greatest civilization Earth had ever seen. To his followers, this was not just poetic language. They pictured real shorelines now buried under miles of water, ancient stone streets where traders once walked, and temples whose towers pointed to constellations as if to remind their builders of a shared cosmic origin. But in the world of science, belief alone is never enough. For Mu to be accepted as history rather than legend, it needed evidence carved in something harder than faith. Churchward's critics were quick to point out that the most damaging absence was geological proof. The ocean floor of the Pacific, mapped in detail during the 20th century with sonar and satellite technology, shows no trace of a sunken landmass the size of Mu. According to plate tectonics, the study of how Earth's crust shifts and moves over time, continents cannot simply disappear in a single night. Even when land sinks, as parts of ancient coastlines have, the process leaves clear scars in the rock record. The Pacific Basin, geologists argued, bears no such wound. If Mu had truly been as vast as South America, its disappearance should have left behind unmistakable debris fields and irregular continental shelves. Yet this absence of proof did not silence everyone. Those sympathetic to the legend countered with a different view. Perhaps Mu was never a massive continental plate in the first place. What if it was instead a network of large islands, volcanic in origin, spread across the Pacific? In such a case, a series of terrible eruptions, much like the destruction of Krakatoa in 1883, but multiplied many times over, could have destroyed its core settlements. Erosion, earthquakes, and rising seas at the end of the last ice age might have done the rest, scattering its remains into the deep, where they would be nearly impossible to recognize today. This idea gained support among a small number of researchers who were already interested in other drowned lands from human prehistory. They pointed to Doggerland, the low-lying plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe and was submerged around 8,000 years ago. They spoke of Sunderland, a massive land area in Southeast Asia that flooded when ice melted roughly 12,000 years ago, the same timeline Churchward gave for Mu's destruction. Perhaps, they suggested, the Pacific legend was a cultural echo of real geological events that had taken place far from where Churchward believed, but the faithful were not content with geological guessing. They sought cultural and linguistic traces, threads that might link separate peoples to a common ancestral home. Here, the similarities between Pacific Islander traditions and those of distant cultures were put forward as tantalizing clues. In the chants and oral histories of Polynesia, there are repeated references to homelands beyond the horizon, places that sank beneath the waves after the earth shook or the sea came in. To some, these were simply migration myths, symbolic stories explaining how people came to live on the islands they do today. To others, they were coded memories of real disasters handed down across centuries, preserved in song long after the details of geography were lost. And then there were the symbols. Church would claim that certain patterns carved into Niven's tablets matched those found in temples from India to Mesoamerica. Spirals, step designs, and stylized sun discs. Shapes that might mean nothing to a casual observer were, to him, the fingerprints of a single source. He argued that these were not coincidence but proof of transmission, survivors of Mu carrying their art, their religion, and their knowledge into the world, planting the seeds for later civilizations. Mainstream historians countered with a simpler explanation. Human beings share the same physical and environmental limits. Spirals appear in art because they appear in nature, in shells, in storms, in galaxies. Stepped structures arise because they are stable and easy to build. Sun symbols are universal because the sun is universal, the giver of life in every culture. Such shapes could have been invented independently in dozens of places without any contact at all. Still, there is a particular appeal in imagining that far-flung cultures are connected by something more than coincidence. It turns the world into a puzzle with missing pieces, and each resemblance, each echo of Mu, feels like the edge of a new discovery. This was the space in which Churchwood thrived, weaving together scattered observations into a single grand story. In his telling, the fall of Mu was not just a historical event, but a trauma so deep it reshaped the path of the entire human race. The cause of that trauma, he insisted, was sudden and total. He described volcanoes erupting together, earthquakes ripping apart the land, and whole cities toppling before their people could even flee. In this chaos, the earth's crust beneath Mu broke apart, and the land dropped into what he called the Great Abyss of Fire. It was a scene meant to inspire awe and fear in equal measure. The image of an entire civilization erased in a single night is almost too large to understand. Perhaps that is why it has lasted. It is a story that lingers in the way great tragedies do, even without the proof to anchor it. Skeptics, of course, saw other possibilities. The disaster Churchwood described could have been a metaphor, a mythologized version of events that took place over decades or centuries rather than hours. Cultures under stress often compress time in their oral histories, turning long struggles into single moments of loss. A slow decline due to environmental change, lack of resources, or conflict might be remembered as a single terrible night when the land fell. In this reading, Mu's end is less about fire and brimstone and more about the complex, gradual unraveling that has ended so many civilizations. But for those invested in the legend, this was missing the point. The appeal of Mu was never just about proving it existed. It was about what it represented, the idea that humanity once lived in unity, sharing a single home before being scattered across the globe. Whether that home was a geological continent or a symbolic one, whether its destruction was literal or poetic, Mu stood as a reminder that the story of our origins may be far more complicated than we think. Somewhere between science and myth, between what can be measured and what can only be imagined, the outline of Mu still drifts in the mind's eye. And for now, that is where it will remain, at least until someone finds the proof that has escaped us for over a century. But proof or not, the next chapter in the story will push us even further into the realm of the impossible, to examine whether the people of Mu were entirely human at all. To follow the thread of Mu into its most mysterious territory, we have to step away from the stones and maps for a moment and enter a more speculative space, the question of who its people actually were. In Churchward's account, the Nasal of Mu were humans, but humans unlike any who came after them. They were said to be taller, stronger, and more harmonious in their way of life, governed by a single set of laws and united under one spiritual belief system. Their society, according to his translations, had no great internal wars, no broken kingdoms, and no endless cycles of conquest and collapse. Instead, their energy was devoted to knowledge, astronomy, agriculture, navigation, and architecture, mastered to a degree that still puzzles even the most optimistic view of ancient human ability. But the deeper you read into these accounts, the more the line between myth and science fiction begins to blur. Embedded within the tablets, Churchward claimed, were hints that the Nakal's origins were not purely from Earth. This is where the so-called ancient astronaut hypothesis enters, a theory suggesting that in humanity's deep past, beings from beyond Earth visited and shaped our development. For many, the phrase brings to mind images of sleek starships and glowing machinery, but in the context of Mu it is far more subtle. These beings, if they existed, were woven into the life of the continent, not as distant overseers, but as direct participants. Supporters of the idea point to parallel myths from cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, sky beings who came down from the heavens to establish order and teach humanity the arts of civilization. The Mayan Popol Vuh tells of sky gods who created mankind from nothing, breathing life into figures of clay and corn. The Hindu Vedas describe Vimanas, flying chariots piloted by divine figures, whose battles and journeys played out both in the skies and on the ground. To believers, these are not disconnected stories, but fragments of a single memory, that a more advanced intelligence once walked among early humans. If Mu was their first point of contact, as some suspect, the Nakal may have been the product of hybridization, a mingling of human and otherworldly DNA. It is a controversial idea, even in fringe research, not only because it challenges the boundaries of anthropology, but because it forces us to rethink what it means to be human at all. Could the precision of Mu's alleged architecture, the ease with which its people navigated vast oceans, and the unity of its culture all stem from an inheritance we no longer possess? Or, more provocatively, from a partnership we have long since forgotten? This line of thinking leads to unsettling implications. If such a relationship existed, was it voluntary, a shared venture between two species, or was it imposed? Ancient myths are filled with both kind and controlling gods, some bringing gifts, others demanding tribute or obedience. The question becomes even darker when we consider the possibility that Mu's sudden destruction was not an accident of geology, but an intentional act. Could it be that the continent was erased because of what it represented, a merging of worlds that others, human or otherwise, found unacceptable? Here the legend takes on the flavor of a cautionary tale. Some versions suggest that the Nakal's knowledge became too great, their independence too absolute, prompting those who had once guided them to step in the most final way possible. Others propose that the hybrids themselves, if hybrids they were, could not sustain their population over time, their unique genetic balance unstable in the face of environmental change. In either scenario, the end of Mu becomes not just a disaster, but a form of deliberate erasure. Of course, mainstream historians dismiss all of this as imaginative overreach. There is no physical evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, no genetic markers in modern humans that point clearly to non-Earth origins. Linguists argue that similarities between myths are the result of shared human psychology and the universal themes of creation, destruction, and divine intervention. And yet the persistence of these parallels from the South Pacific to the Middle East, from Central America to the Indian subcontinent, keeps the idea alive in the public imagination. Even without proof, it is difficult to shake the sense that such similarities demand an explanation, For those captured by the mystery, Mu's story becomes a lens through which to view all of human history. The pyramids, the moai, the precision-cut stone walls of Cusco in Peru, the undeciphered symbols on Easter Island's Rongo-Rongo tablets, all become pieces of a larger puzzle. Could these be the work of cultures independently reaching their own heights? Or are they the echoes of a shared ancestor civilization, the last scattered fingerprints of a lost world? Churchward himself was clear about where he stood. In his books, he painted Mu as the first great center of human life, the place from which all other civilizations spread out like spokes from a wheel. Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the pre-Columbian Americas, all were in his telling the children of Mu, their core achievements rooted in a body of knowledge carried across oceans by survivors. If this was true, it would mean that the history we have written for ourselves is incomplete, a middle chapter without its beginning, and yet, without the original tablets to examine, without even a single authenticated artifact that can be traced directly to Mu, the story remains adrift between belief and skepticism. This tension is part of its endurance. If Mu had been definitively proven, it would have been absorbed into textbooks and treated as settled fact. If it had been conclusively disproven, it would have faded into the background noise of discarded ideas. Instead, it exists in a liminal space, compelling enough to inspire, elusive enough to resist closure. What is certain is that the legend touches something deep in the human imagination. We are drawn to the idea of a unified origin, a golden age in which our species lived in balance with itself and the world, before some great fall scattered us across the globe. Whether Mu was a real place or a symbolic one, it functions as a mirror reflecting our hopes and fears about who we are and where we come from. Perhaps that is why, despite all the arguments against it, the story continues to find new audiences. Somewhere in the intersection of myth, memory, and the ocean's uncharted depths, Mu waits, not necessarily to be found in stone or sand, but to be explored in the way we think about our past. The next steps in this journey will take us beyond the romanticized vision of lost continents and into the harder questions. If Mu's people truly carried a body of knowledge unknown to us now, where did it go? And if even fragments of it survive, hidden in plain sight, could rediscovering it change the course of our future as dramatically as it once shaped our past? If the Nakal truly held knowledge beyond anything preserved in our modern records, the question becomes almost irresistible. Where did it all go? In the official timeline of history, breakthroughs in astronomy, engineering, and navigation appear in different civilizations at different times, each seemingly the product of local innovation. But the story of Mu suggests a different pattern, that these skills were once concentrated in a single place, refined over thousands of years, and then scattered in fragments when the motherland vanished. If that scattering happened, it would mean the legacies of Mu might still be with us, not in intact blueprints or perfectly preserved tools, but in echoes and adaptations woven into the fabric of later cultures. One of the most compelling arguments for this view comes from architecture. Across the globe, ancient structures show a level of precision and durability that modern builders sometimes struggle to match. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns almost perfectly with the compass directions, its base measurements so exact that they differ by mere fractions of an inch. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman fit massive stones together so tightly that even a thin blade cannot slide between them, despite no use of mortar. On Easter Island, the Moai stand as silent witnesses to an engineering feat that required not only skill but deep coordination within a society. To believers in Mu, these are not isolated achievements. They are regional variations on a shared ancestral skill set carried by those who fled the sinking land. In Churchward's reconstruction, this knowledge was more than just technical. It was spiritual in a way that blurred the boundaries between religion and science. The Nakal, he wrote, did not separate the physical world from the metaphysical. To them, understanding the movements of the stars was not merely a matter of navigation or planting seasons. It was part of understanding the nature of existence itself. Their temples doubled as observatories, their rituals as methods of encoding and transmitting knowledge. In such a culture, losing the homeland would have meant more than the loss of material wealth. It would have meant the disruption of the very system that kept their knowledge alive. And so when the survivors reached new lands, their descendants preserved what they could. But without the full structure of Mu society to sustain it, that knowledge began to break apart. Some pieces may have been hidden deliberately, perhaps to prevent misuse or to protect sacred traditions from being watered down. Others were transformed over generations into myths, stripped of their technical details, but keeping their symbolic meaning. In this way, a practical method for moving massive stones might become, over centuries, a legend of statues that walked. A precise astronomical observation could become a story of gods descending from the sky. The essence of the information remained, but its original context was lost. This process is not unique to the legend of Mu. Anthropologists have observed similar patterns in other cultures when they undergo rapid disruption, whether from war migration or environmental collapse. Practical survival techniques become encoded in ceremonial songs. Memories of real disasters transform into cautionary tales told to children. If Mu existed, its legacy may be hiding in plain sight, buried not in the ground, but in the living traditions of its supposed descendants. One example often cited by those exploring this idea is the Polynesian art of navigation. Long before European explorers ventured into the Pacific, Polynesian voyagers were sailing thousands of miles between islands without compasses or maps. They read the stars, the swell of the ocean, the flight patterns of birds, and the color of the water to find their way. These techniques were passed down orally, preserved in chants and stories. To the people who practiced them, they were simply part of life. To an outsider searching for traces of Mu, they might be the preserved fragment of a much older, much broader mastery of the seas. Another possible remnant lies in the recurring theme of a lost homeland across multiple cultures. The Greeks had Atlantis. The Maya had their tales of lands swallowed by the sea. Pacific Islanders told of Hawaii or other distant places from which their ancestors came. Skeptics argue that such stories arise naturally in seafaring cultures where migration and disaster are common. But to those who see the world through the lens of Mu, these shared themes are like fingerprints, evidence of a shared trauma remembered and reinterpreted in different languages and settings. Still, the absence of tangible, verifiable artifacts tied directly to Mu remains the great obstacle. Churchwood never produced the original Nakal tablets for independent examination. The Niven tablets, while real, have never been conclusively linked to the Pacific or to any culture matching Churchwood's description of Mu. And the supposed underwater structures that some divers have claimed to see in the Pacific remain controversial, often explained as natural rock formations. In the absence of hard proof, the case for Mu must rely on patterns, similarities of design, myth, and method across cultures separated by vast distances and centuries. For some, that is enough to keep the theory alive. Human history is full of examples where once dismissed ideas later found unexpected support. The city of Troy, long considered a mythical invention from Homer's epics, was eventually uncovered in the 19th century by Heinrich Schliemann. The existence of giant squids, once thought to be sailors' hallucinations, was confirmed with photographic evidence in the 21st century. Such examples offer a kind of cautious hope to those who believe in Mu, the possibility that what is dismissed as legend today might one day be recognized as fact. Yet there is also a cautionary side to this hope. For every myth later proven true, there are countless others that remain just stories, their origins tangled in the human tendency to imagine grander pasts and more dramatic catastrophes than history can support. Mu, for now, belongs to that vast category of unverified possibilities, not disproven, but not confirmed, suspended in the strange space where imagination, memory, and scattered data meet. And perhaps that is why the legend continues to resonate. It is a story about connection, that all of us, no matter our current borders or languages, might trace our origins to the same shore. It is a story about loss, that something magnificent and unifying could vanish almost without a trace. And it is a story about endurance, that even when a world is gone, pieces of it might survive in the way we build, the way we tell stories, and the way we look at the stars. As we move deeper into this exploration, the question will shift from whether Mu existed to what it would mean if it did. If its people truly carried knowledge that we have lost, could we recover it? And if we could, would we even understand how to use it? Or would we risk repeating the same mistakes that may have led to their destruction? If we are to imagine Mu not as a mere legend, but as a real place in Earth's distant past, then we have to imagine its destruction not only as an ending, but as a transformation. Civilizations do not vanish without leaving behind ripples. The world is full of such ripples, cultural oddities, unexplained technologies, and stubborn myths. And to believers in Mu, they form a trail leading back to that lost motherland. Yet the further one follows that trail, the more it blurs into something stranger, a story that is less about archaeology and more about the forces that shape human memory. Churchward's account of Mu's final night reads almost like a piece of epic poetry, but in his telling, it was drawn from the plain words of the Nakal tablets. The earth beneath the continent trembled violently. Volcanoes erupted in succession, throwing up clouds of ash that turned day into darkness. The seas swelled with unnatural speed, surging inland as if summoned. Great cracks split the land, swallowing cities whole. And then, in what he described as a single convulsion, the entire landmass dropped into the depths, disappearing beneath what he called the great abyss of fire. It was over before the survivors could even understand what had happened. In geological terms, this scenario is almost impossible. Land doesn't simply fall into the ocean like a collapsing stage set. Even massive earthquakes rarely cause more than localized sinking. The slow grind of tectonic plates can raise mountains or open rift valleys, but it operates over millions of years. To mainstream science, Churchward's description sounds more like a symbolic compression of multiple disasters, perhaps a combination of volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, and long-term sea level rise remembered as one catastrophic night. But legends have a way of amplifying the impossible, and for those invested in the idea of Mu, this sudden destruction has a different significance. In their view, it is the ultimate explanation for why a civilization so advanced could leave so little behind. If Mu's knowledge, art, and architecture were centralized in its great cities, then their sudden destruction would have erased the physical heart of its culture in an instant. The survivors, scattered across thousands of miles, would have carried fragments but not the whole. In this light, the migration patterns of ancient peoples take on new meaning. Polynesian voyagers crossing open ocean, the earliest settlers of the Americas arriving by sea, the mysterious origins of certain South American coastal cultures, all could, in theory, be seen as the footprints of Mu's refugees. Some proponents even suggest that the sudden rise of advanced societies in otherwise isolated areas might be explained by the arrival of these survivors, bringing with them skills in agriculture, navigation, and construction that far outpaced the local norm. Yet migration is not proof. And here the debate always returns to the same impasse. Mainstream archaeologists point out that human beings are endlessly inventive, and that similar solutions can arise independently in different places. Ocean navigation, for example, is a skill that could be developed in multiple regions without a shared origin, especially for peoples living on archipelagos. But to the believers, the precision and scale of some ancient achievements suggest an inheritance, not an invention, a spark passed down from an older flame. And so the hunt for physical traces of Mu continues, often in the places least accessible to us, the ocean floor. Over the decades, divers and researchers have claimed to find unusual formations beneath the waves, terraces, walls and shapes that appear too regular to be natural. The most famous of these is the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, a massive stepped formation that some insist is the remnant of a sunken city. While most geologists classify it as a natural structure, shaped by currents and fractures, a few argue for human modification. If those few are correct, it could represent the edge of a forgotten settlement. Perhaps not Mu itself, but a fragment of the wider world it once touched. But here lies the frustration. The deeper one goes, the harder it becomes to separate fact from interpretation. Every stone terrace underwater could be a coincidence of geology. Every carving on a weathered slab could be the work of a much later hand. The ocean guards its secrets fiercely, and without the kind of unquestionable artifact that could link such structures to a specific time and culture, they remain suggestive but not definitive. Still, to dismiss the possibility entirely is to underestimate the persistence of human memory. Around the world, oral traditions have preserved astonishingly accurate accounts of real geological events, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts and sea level changes passed down for hundreds or even thousands of years. Some Aboriginal stories in Australia, for example, describe coastal landscapes as they were before being flooded at the end of the last ice age, a detail confirmed by modern geological mapping. If such accuracy is possible, then perhaps the legends of Mu are not mere fantasy, but a heavily mythologized record of real events that took place in the deep past. This is the paradox at the heart of the Mu debate. The story may be too extraordinary to fit within the neat boundaries of current science, yet too persistent to be ignored entirely. Its survival suggests that it speaks to something fundamental in us, a longing for unity, for a time when the world was less divided, and for the possibility that we have lost more than we realize. Whether Mu was a continent in the Pacific, a network of islands, or simply a symbolic homeland invented to explain migration and disaster, it endures because it offers a vision of connection. And perhaps that is why the legend has shown such resilience in the face of skepticism. Each generation finds new ways to interpret it, adapting the details to fit new understandings of the world. In the early 20th century, Mu was presented as a literal lost continent, a kind of Pacific Atlantis. In more recent decades, it has been reimagined as a metaphor for a prehistoric global civilization, or even as an allegory for the fragility of complex societies. In the realm of speculative history and alternative archaeology, Mu remains one of the most potent symbols, a reminder that the line between what is possible and what is accepted is not always the same. From here, the story will take us into the heart of the most disputed territory, the supposed connections between Mu and the earliest civilizations we can document with certainty. Were the builders of the first pyramids, the planners of ancient cities, and the astronomers who charted the heavens working from their own genius alone? Or were they the distant heirs of a knowledge system forged in a place now hidden beneath the Pacific? The answer, if there is one, may change not just how we view Mu, but how we understand the entire arc of human history. When you trace the oldest human civilizations back through time, the trail eventually reaches a point where written history dissolves into archaeology, and archaeology dissolves into guessing. In that hazy space, the legend of Mu finds its most fertile ground. For Churchward, the great cultures we know, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Mesoamerica, were not isolated sparks, but branches from the same ancient root. If his reading of the Nakul tablets was correct, the survivors of Mu carried their knowledge to new lands, sowing the seeds of civilizations that would rise thousands of years later. And while this sweeping theory has been criticized as overly romantic and lacking hard evidence, There is no denying that certain parallels between these early cultures continue to invite curiosity. Consider the pyramids. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid at Giza is aligned so precisely to the compass directions that its error margin is less than 1/12 of a degree, a feat that would challenge even modern engineers. Thousands of miles away in Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan rises with similar geometric precision, and its layout mirrors astronomical alignments that were just as important to the people who built it. In China's Shanxi province, ancient pyramid-shaped mounds follow the same basic principles, though they are built of earth rather than stone. Mainstream archaeology explains these similarities as convergent evolution. Cultures faced with similar architectural challenges and ceremonial needs arrive at similar solutions. But for believers in Mu, the shared geometry is more than coincidence, it is a signature. The same argument extends to megalithic construction. From the Cyclopean stone walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru to the Trilithon at Baalbek in Lebanon, there are ancient structures whose blocks are so large and precisely cut that their construction remains a topic of debate. Standard explanations cite ingenious but labor-intensive methods, using ramps, levers, and coordinated human effort. Alternative theories suggest these feats required a mastery of physics or tools that have not survived into the present. To proponents of Mu, such construction is exactly what you would expect from cultures preserving fragments of a much older engineering tradition. Language, too, has been drawn into the discussion. Church would claim that elements of the Nakal script he learned in India could be found in the symbols carved on the Niven tablets from Mexico. While most linguists reject this as unsubstantiated, the idea has inspired some to search for deeper connections between the world's language families. If a proto-language had once existed, the spoken and written tongue of Mu, its echoes might still be hidden in the structure of modern languages, just as Indo-European roots link English to Hindi or Greek. Yet here, too, the evidence is slippery, complicated by the way languages evolve, borrow, and lose words over time. Even the mythic and spiritual traditions of early cultures have been compared for signs of a common origin. Flood myths are among the most widespread stories on Earth. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh describes a deluge sent by the gods, a tale mirrored in the Hebrew Bible's account of Noah, in Hindu stories of Manu, and in Polynesian legends of great waves swallowing the land. Skeptics argue that floods are such a common and devastating natural event that it's inevitable they would be enshrined in myth worldwide. But for those looking through the lens of Mu, these are all distant memories of the same disaster, the night the great motherland was lost to the sea. To understand why this idea persists, despite the lack of definitive proof, you have to look at what it offers: a narrative that connects humanity across geography and time, one that frames our diversity as the branches of a single ancient family tree. It is a powerful antidote to the more fragmented view of history, where civilizations rise and fall in isolation, learning little from one another until relatively late in the human story. If real, would mean that our shared heritage runs deeper than we think, and that even cultures separated by oceans may have begun side by side. But this vision comes with its own challenges. If the survivors of Mu truly spread across the globe, why is there no more direct archaeological evidence, no tools, inscriptions, or artifacts that can be securely dated to a time before Egypt or Sumer? Some believers argue that the perishable materials used in certain types of Mu construction could explain this absence. If much of their architecture was built in wood or other organic materials, it would have vanished long ago, leaving only stone monuments in the most durable forms. Others suggest that the survivors deliberately concealed their origins, either to protect their knowledge from misuse or because their identity became a burden in the eyes of the societies they joined. There is also the possibility that Mu's influence, if it existed, was less about physical migration and more about cultural diffusion through long-distance seafaring. Maritime archaeologists have uncovered evidence that humans were capable of significant ocean voyages far earlier than previously believed. The ancient Lapita culture, for example, spread across thousands of miles of the Pacific more than 3,000 years ago, using advanced navigation skills passed down orally. If such capabilities existed in prehistory, then knowledge, including architectural ideas, myths, and even religious practices, could have traveled without large-scale population movements. The idea of Mu's influence reaches even further when viewed through the lens of technology. In Churchward's writings, he hinted at an advanced science that blended seamlessly with spirituality, allowing the Nakal to harness forces unknown to us today. This is one of the most controversial aspects of his account, often dismissed as pure fantasy, yet it resonates with the broader pattern of legends about lost technologies. The lightning weapons of Zeus, the flying machines of the Vedas, the fire from the sky in Native American stories. Could these be poetic descriptions of real tools and devices filtered through the language of myth? Or are they simply metaphors for natural forces misunderstood by ancient peoples? In the absence of proof, the debate often becomes less about evidence and more about worldview. To accept the possibility of Mu is to accept that human history might be far older and more interconnected than current models allow. It is to allow for the idea that entire civilizations could rise, thrive, and vanish without leaving the kind of traces we consider definitive. To reject Mu is to maintain the framework that history, while full of mysteries, is essentially knowable through the tools of archaeology, geology, and linguistics as they stand today. What makes the legend enduring is that it does not require absolute belief to capture the imagination. Even for those who doubt its literal truth, Mu works as a symbol of the fragility of human achievement, of the vastness of the past, and of the possibility that there are still chapters of our story waiting to be rediscovered. In this way, the lost continent becomes not just a place, but a mirror reflecting our curiosity back at us. And it is in that mirror that we might glimpse something unexpected, the urge to keep searching, even when we know the answers may never come. If Mu's shadow stretches across the ancient world, then perhaps the most revealing way to trace it is not by looking for what is present, but for what is missing. Human history, as preserved in the archaeological record, is a patchwork of sudden leaps. Farming appears in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 years ago, and within a few thousand years, cities rise in Mesopotamia with monumental architecture, codified laws, and complex trade systems. Thousands of miles away, the Indus Valley culture develops advanced urban planning, complete with grid layouts and sophisticated drainage systems. Across the ocean, the Olmec civilization emerges with colossal stone heads and intricate ceremonial centers. Conventional history explains these as independent breakthroughs, the natural outcome of human innovation responding to local needs. But the legend of Mu whispers another explanation, that these were not spontaneous sparks, but embers carried from the same ancient fire. If that is the case, then each of these early civilizations may hold clues to a common ancestor. In Churchward's vision, the survivors of Mu did not simply wander aimlessly into the world. They settled with purpose, choosing locations where their skills could flourish. They might have introduced agriculture to societies still reliant on hunting and gathering, taught maritime navigation to coastal peoples, or demonstrated stonework techniques to communities unfamiliar with large-scale construction. Over time, these gifts would be absorbed and adapted until the memory of their origin faded, replaced by local myths that only dimly reflected the reality. One of the more intriguing aspects of Churchward's description is the Nakal's apparent lack of internal warfare. He presented Mu as a society that avoided large-scale conflict, focusing instead on cooperative achievement. While this may sound utopian, there are real-world examples of societies where warfare was minimal or ritualized, rather than constant. Some Pacific Island cultures resolved disputes through highly structured competitions, dances, or gift exchanges, avoiding the destruction that comes with prolonged fighting. Archaeologists have also noted that in certain regions, fortifications and weapons appear only after population growth or environmental stress, suggesting that peaceful coexistence was possible under favorable conditions. However, the question remains, could such unity, even on a smaller scale, survive long enough to be remembered as the defining trait of a civilization? It is possible that this image of Mu reflects less an actual political reality and more a cultural ideal, the way a people wanted to see themselves, or the way later storytellers imagined their ancestors. Legends often preserve aspirations alongside memories, and the portrait of a harmonious Mu might be as much an expression of longing as of history. The unifying thread through all these elements, governance, religion, architecture, navigation, and peace, is the idea of balance. In the Mu narrative, everything works together. Politics serves the people. Religion connects them to the land and the cosmos. Engineering reflects both practicality and beauty, and travel spreads knowledge rather than conquest. This image, whether real or imagined, resonates deeply because it contrasts so sharply with much of recorded history, which is dominated by conflict, hierarchy, and exploitation. Mu becomes, in this sense, not just a lost civilization, but a lost possibility, a vision of what humanity might achieve if it could align its strengths rather than turn them against itself. From the Mosaic perspective, each of these traits could have been drawn from different sources. The political unity might come from Polynesian confederations or Southeast Asian maritime kingdoms. The religion could be distilled from Andean, Oceanic, and Asian philosophies. The architecture could combine memories of Micronesian basalt works, Mesoamerican pyramids, and Southeast Asian stone temples. The navigation skills could be the legacy of countless voyagers from the Indian to the Pacific Ocean. When assembled into a single narrative, these pieces form the Nakal, a composite people embodying the highest achievements of many different societies. If that is the case, then the truth of Mu lies not in a single location waiting to be discovered, but in recognizing the shared human capacity for adaptation, creativity, and cooperation across vast distances. It suggests that ancient peoples were far more interconnected than we tend to assume, and that the boundaries between their worlds were more porous than the maps in our history books would suggest. Of course, for those who hold to the literal interpretation, the Mosaic model will always feel like a compromise, an interesting theory, but one that robs Mu of its grandeur as a single towering civilization. And for strict skeptics, even the Mosaic model may lean too heavily on coincidence and pattern-seeking. But between these extremes lies a fertile ground for exploration, where the search for Mu becomes the search for the deep roots of human connection. In the next part of our journey, we will examine one of the most debated aspects of the Mu legend, its supposed advanced technology. Whether this technology was literal, symbolic, or entirely imagined, it forms a critical part of the story, shaping how we imagine the capabilities and perhaps the downfall of this mysterious civilization. The idea of Mu's advanced technology has always been one of its most tantalizing and controversial aspects. Churchward described a civilization capable of achievements that, in some ways, rival or even surpass those of our own age. In his telling, the Nakal harnessed energy from natural forces, built monumental structures with precision stonework, and navigated the vast Pacific with a mastery that would not be equaled for thousands of years. To believers, these claims elevate Mu from a prehistoric culture to a pinnacle of human ingenuity. To skeptics, they are embellishments without evidence, more fantasy than fact. But if we approach the question carefully, we can separate what might be plausible from what belongs entirely to the realm of legend. In Churchward's account, one of the Nakal's most significant achievements was their ability to tap into what he called primary forces, a kind of natural energy drawn from the earth itself. He described it as clean, abundant, and capable of powering their cities, machinery, and even vehicles. While this sounds fantastical, the notion of societies using ambient natural energy is not entirely alien to human history. Ancient peoples have long harnessed the power of wind, water, and the sun, though in ways far less advanced than what Churchwood envisioned. It is possible that his descriptions of primary forces were inspired by older myths of sacred energy, such as the Polynesian concept of mana or the Chinese idea of qi, reinterpreted through a modern technological lens. The stone architecture of Mu, as imagined by Churchwood and later writers, occurs another focal point of its supposed technological prowess. The Nakal were said to work with massive blocks of stone, fitting them together so precisely that not even a blade could slip between them. This is a familiar theme in ancient mysteries, often invoked in discussions of Inca walls in Cusco, the megaliths of Baalbek, or the pyramids of Egypt. In the Pacific, too, there are examples of remarkable stone construction: the basalt columns of Nan Madol, the coral block temples of Tonga, and the stepped platforms of Easter Island. While modern archaeology explains these feats as the product of skilled labor, clever engineering, and generations of accumulated knowledge, the sheer precision and scale can still inspire speculation about techniques we no longer fully understand. Navigation may be the most credible of Mu's supposed technological triumphs. We know beyond doubt that Pacific Islanders developed sophisticated methods for long-distance voyaging without modern instruments. Polynesian wayfinders read the stars, swells, and cloud patterns with a level of expertise that allowed them to traverse thousands of miles of open ocean and arrive exactly where they intended. If Mu represents a composite of many seafaring cultures, its legendary fleets could be a symbolic tribute to this collective mastery. Even today, the revival of traditional wayfinding in places like Hawaii and Micronesia demonstrates how powerful and effective these ancient methods remain. Churchwood also spoke of Mu's written language, supposedly preserved in the Nakal tablets. He claimed it was a highly developed script, capable of expressing complex ideas and recording scientific knowledge. While no physical tablets have ever been verified, the idea of an advanced writing system in prehistory is not implausible in itself. The discovery of early scripts like the Indus Valley symbols or the Rongorongo glyphs of Easter Island reminds us that writing has emerged in diverse forms and, in some cases, been lost entirely. If Mu's script ever existed, its disappearance could be explained by the destruction of the society and the scattering of its survivors. Though without tangible evidence, this remains guesswork. One of the more extravagant claims about Mu's technology involves transportation. Churchwood suggested that the Nakal may have used flying machines or other advanced vehicles. This is where the story veers sharply into the speculative. While myths of flight are common across cultures, from the chariots of the Hindu gods to the feathered serpents of Mesoamerica, they are generally interpreted as symbolic rather than literal. It is tempting to see these as echoes of real technologies, but without artifacts or engineering evidence, such ideas remain in the realm of legend. Even if we strip away the more fantastical elements, the picture that remains is still impressive. A maritime culture with advanced navigation, monumental architecture, a possibly sophisticated symbolic system, and a worldview that integrated science, spirituality, and environmental stewardship. This is a vision that resonates because it combines the tangible achievements of known ancient cultures with the inspiring possibility that there is more to our past than we currently understand. The question then is whether these achievements belong to one society or to many, later woven together into the fabric of the Mu legend. From the mosaic perspective, Mu's technology could be a distillation of centuries of human innovation across the Pacific and surrounding regions. The energy of the earth might recall the spiritual forces described in Polynesian, Asian, and Andean traditions. The precise stonework could draw on memories of megalithic sites from multiple islands. The navigation expertise could reflect the cumulative skills of countless voyagers who crisscrossed the ocean long before Europeans arrived. Skeptics argue that by attributing these achievements to a single vanished civilization, we risk erasing the individual histories of the cultures that actually accomplished them, the real builders of Nan Madol, the navigators of Hawaii, the temple architects of Tonga. These are people whose legacies deserve recognition in their own right. Folding them into the myth of Mu might create a grander story, but it also distorts the reality of their achievements. Believers counter that such similarities across distant places still demand explanation. Independent invention is possible, but when architectural styles, symbolic motifs, and navigation techniques align across thousands of miles, it is reasonable to ask whether there was a deeper connection. For them, Mu provides a unifying theory, a way to link scattered pieces into a coherent whole. Even if the physical evidence remains elusive, in the end, the discussion of Mu's technology mirrors the larger debate about the legend itself. It is a balancing act between wonder and rigor, between honoring the achievements of known cultures and leaving open the possibility that we have only glimpsed part of the human story. Whether Mu's technology was literal, symbolic, or a mix of both, it has served for over a century as a reminder that our ancestors may have been far more capable and far more connected than we give them credit for. In the next stage, we will explore perhaps the most emotionally charged part of the Mu legend, its destruction. This is the moment that turns a thriving civilization into a mystery, the event that takes it from the realm of history into the realm of loss. Whether seen as a sudden catastrophe or a slow drowning, the fall of Mu is what gives the legend its enduring poignancy and its warning. Every great legend of a lost civilization shares one central moment: the fall. It is the scene that turns memory into myth, the event that explains why a place of such splendor no longer exists. For Atlantis, it was a single night of earthquakes and floods. For Lemuria, it was a slow descent beneath the Indian Ocean. For Mu, the accounts vary, but they all point to a cataclysm of unimaginable scale, an event that erased a continent and scattered its people to the winds. Churchward described Mu's destruction as both sudden and total. In his telling, volcanic upheavals ripped open the Earth's crust, causing the entire landmass to sink beneath the Pacific. This was not a gradual process, but an apocalyptic event. Cities swallowed whole, mountains collapsing into the sea, and millions of people lost within days. It is a scene drawn with almost cinematic detail, and for many who first encountered the story, it was this vision of overwhelming disaster that left the deepest mark. From a geological standpoint, the notion of an entire continent vanishing in such a short time is difficult to reconcile with what we know about plate tectonics. Land masses do not simply drop into the mantle. Instead, they are broken apart and reshaped over millions of years. Yet this does not mean that ancient peoples could not have experienced catastrophes on a scale that felt like the end of the world. Tsunamis, massive earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions can devastate entire regions in hours. For those living in coastal cities or island communities, such events could indeed erase entire landscapes from memory within a generation. The Pacific is home to the Ring of Fire, a chain of tectonic boundaries that produces the most intense seismic and volcanic activity on Earth. Along this ring, islands can be created or destroyed within decades, and undersea earthquakes can trigger waves that cross oceans. Historical records from the last few centuries describe eruptions and quakes that wiped out whole settlements. The 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, for example, obliterated more than 160 villages and sent shockwaves around the globe. For a population without modern science, The destruction of Mu could easily have been understood and remembered as the sudden disappearance of an entire homeland. There is also the possibility of slow destruction. As the last ice age ended, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically, over 300 feet in some regions. Coastal plains became seabeds, and low-lying islands vanished. For people whose lives were tied to the shore, the retreat of the land might have felt like the ocean itself was swallowing the world. Over centuries, stories of this slow drowning could merge with accounts of sudden disasters, creating a single narrative of catastrophic loss. In many Pacific cultures, flood myths hold a prominent place in oral tradition. Some speak of great waves that came without warning, others of islands sinking beneath storms, and still others of gods or spirits punishing humanity for disobedience. These myths often serve a dual purpose. They preserve memories of real events and convey moral lessons. In the case of Mu, Churchwood portrayed the destruction as both a natural disaster and a moral reckoning, a civilization undone by its own arrogance and the breaking of its sacred laws. This framing gives the story a resonance that goes beyond geology, tapping into a universal human theme, the belief that hubris invites downfall. Even today, the image of Mu's destruction resonates because it mirrors anxieties of our own time. Rising seas, changing climates, and increasingly severe natural disasters remind us that human achievements, no matter how advanced, are never immune to the forces of nature. In that sense, Mu becomes not just a relic of the past, but a warning to the present. Survivor legends form the bridge between Mu's destruction and its supposed influence on later cultures. Churchwood claimed that small groups escaped the catastrophe, traveling by sea to the Americas, Asia, and other parts of the Pacific. The survivors carried with them fragments of their knowledge, architecture, agriculture, navigation, and religious beliefs, which they shared with the peoples they encountered. This idea offers a convenient explanation for similarities between distant civilizations, but it also fits with what we know about human migration. After disasters, people move. They bring their skills, their stories, and their ways of seeing the world to new lands where these elements blend with local traditions. From the mosaic perspective, this part of the legend may be closer to reality than the image of an entire continent vanishing overnight. If Mu is a composite of many cultures, then the survivors could represent the historical reality of voyaging, peoples spreading ideas and technologies across the Pacific and beyond. The destruction would then be a metaphor for the breaking apart of a once-connected network, rather than the literal sinking of a single landmass. What makes the destruction of Mu so compelling is its finality. There is no return, no hope of reclaiming the lost land. This absence gives the story a certain gravity. It is not just about what was lost, but about the permanence of that loss. In this way, Mu becomes an emotional landscape as much as a physical one. It embodies the human experience of irreversible change, the knowledge that some things once gone cannot be restored. And yet, even in this finality, the legend leaves a thread of continuity. The survivors, the fragments of knowledge, the traces in architecture and myth. This duality, total destruction alongside enduring influence, is part of why the story has lasted. It allows for both mourning and pride, loss and legacy. From a narrative standpoint, the destruction of Mu serves as the pivot on which the entire legend turns. It explains why such a great civilization is gone, why its memory survives only in fragments, and why its influence must be sought in the scattered echoes of other cultures. It also provides a dramatic backdrop for the enduring question, if Mu was real, could it happen again? In the next part, we will follow that thread of survival, exploring how the supposed refugees of Mu might have shaped the cultures they encountered, and how those cultures, in turn, may have preserved fragments of the lost continent's memory in their own traditions. Whether these connections are historical fact symbolic resonance, or a mix of both, they form the living legacy of Mu, a shadow that still stretches across the Pacific and beyond. The survivors of Mu, whether literal refugees from a single, catastrophic event or symbolic stand-ins for the carriers of many ancient traditions, are the crucial link between the vanished homeland and the wider world. Without them, the story of Mu would be little more than a cautionary tale about the fragility of civilizations. With them, it becomes a story of endurance, adaptation, and the transmission of knowledge across vast distances. Churchward painted these survivors as skilled navigators, architects, and philosophers who spread out in small fleets settling in the Americas, Asia, and the islands of the Pacific. Each landing, he claimed, left behind traces of Mu's culture, faint but enduring, woven into the fabric of local traditions. From the perspective of migration history, this idea fits comfortably with what we know about human behavior in the wake of disaster. When a homeland becomes uninhabitable, whether due to environmental change, war, or famine, people move. They take with them what they can carry, not only in material goods, but in skills, languages, and beliefs. Archaeological evidence shows that even in prehistory, humans were capable of extraordinary voyages. The settlement of remote islands in Polynesia, thousands of miles from the nearest continental shore, is one example. The crossing into the Americas via the Bering Land Bridge, or possibly earlier coastal routes, is another. The survivors of Mu, real or imagined, could easily fit into this long tradition of human resilience. Churchward and later writers pointed to specific similarities between distant cultures as evidence of Mu's influence. The step pyramids of Mesoamerica, the stone platforms of Polynesia, and the terrace fields of Southeast Asia were all cited as echoes of a shared architectural heritage. The decorative motifs found in textiles, pottery, and carvings, spirals, sunbursts, and stylized waves, were likewise interpreted as remnants of Mu's artistic language. While mainstream archaeology often explains these similarities as independent, inventions shaped by similar needs and environments, the legend invites a more connected view, that some part of these resemblances may be the result of ideas carried by voyaging peoples across oceans. Religious and philosophical parallels add another layer to the argument. In Churchward's reconstruction, the Nakal religion emphasized harmony between humanity, nature, and the cosmos. Traces of this worldview can be found in many indigenous traditions: the Andean reverence for Pachamama, Mother Earth, the Polynesian concept of mana as a life force permeating all things, the balance-seeking principles of East Asian philosophy. Are these similarities the result of shared origin, convergent thought, or a mix of both? For believers in Mu, the answer is clear. These are the cultural fingerprints of a single enlightened civilization. From a mosaic standpoint, the survivors' story works just as well without a single point of origin. If Mu is a fusion of many real societies, then the survivors could simply represent the countless exchanges of people and knowledge that occurred throughout the prehistoric Pacific and beyond. A navigator from one island might bring new agricultural techniques to another. A group displaced by volcanic activity might introduce new architectural forms to their adopted home. Over time, such movements would create a network of shared ideas, with no single source, but a rich and interconnected heritage. The challenge in tracing such influences lies in separating genuine connections from coincidental resemblance. The spiral motif carved into a temple wall in Polynesia may look like one in Mesoamerica, but without clear evidence of contact, we cannot assume a direct link. And yet, the persistence of these patterns in the Mu narrative speaks to a deeper human tendency. We seek connections. We are drawn to the idea that the scattered pieces of our past might fit together into a larger, more unified story. Oral traditions play a key role in this process. Across the Pacific, myths tell of ancestral homelands far across the sea, of voyages guided by the stars, and of knowledge bestowed by gods or culture heroes who arrived from elsewhere. In some cases, these stories preserve memories of real migrations. In others, they serve as symbolic frameworks for explaining the origins of a people. Either way, they form a bridge between lived history and the imagined grandeur of Mu churchwoods. Version of the survivor tale also carried a moral undertone. The refugees, he suggested, did not simply bring their knowledge to new lands, they also carried the lessons of Mu's downfall. In this way, they became not just teachers, but warners, reminding future generations of the need to live in harmony with the earth and with each other. Whether or not this is historically accurate, it transforms the survivors from mere wanderers into bearers of a cultural mission, one that resonates with the broader theme of civilizations rising and falling in cycles. Modern interpretations of the survivor narrative sometimes take a more symbolic approach. In these versions, the survivors are not a literal group of people, but a metaphor for the endurance of human ideas. Even when a society is destroyed, its knowledge can persist, carried in the minds of travelers, preserved in stories, embedded in art and architecture. This view aligns with how cultural transmission works in the real world. Innovations, beliefs, and artistic styles can leap across vast distances and centuries, surviving long after their original context has been lost. From this perspective, the survivors of Mu are with us still. Their descendants are the navigators who kept traditional wayfinding alive, the architects who built monumental works with nothing but hand tools, the storytellers who kept the memory of drowned lands alive in song and chant. In this way, Mu's legacy becomes less about a vanished place and more about an ongoing thread in the human story, a reminder that the past is never entirely gone, only transformed. By the time the Mu legend reached the 20th and 21st centuries, the survivor motif had taken on yet another form. It became a tool for imagining alternative histories. Writers, filmmakers, and game designers have used Mu as a launching point for worlds in which its refugees founded new civilizations, influenced the course of known history, or even survived in hidden enclaves to the present day. In these retellings, the survivors are no longer just remnants of a lost world. They are agents of change, shaping the future as much as they are shaped by the past. As we move into the final part of this journey, we will return to the central question that has shadowed us from the beginning. Does it matter if Mu was real? The answer lies not only in the search for physical evidence, but in the meaning the legend holds, for those who believe, for those who doubt, and for those who simply find in it a reflection of humanity's deepest hopes and fears. The story of Mu may be a record of actual events, a symbolic mosaic, or a purely imaginative creation. But whatever its origin, it has endured for more than a century in modern consciousness, and perhaps for thousands of years before that in the stories of the sea. Its survivors, real, imagined, or metaphorical, have ensured that Mu itself, even in absence, refuses to sink. In the end, the question that has followed us through every chapter of this exploration refuses to resolve into a simple yes or no. Was Mu real? The answer depends on what we mean by real. If we define it as a single vast continent in the Pacific, populated by a unified civilization whose achievements eclipsed those of its time, then the geological evidence is unforgiving. Plate tectonics, ocean floor mapping, and the study of continental crust tell us that such a landmass could not have vanished in the manner described by James Churchward. The Pacific's islands are volcanic peaks and coral atolls, not the surviving tips of a drowned continent. In that sense, the literal Mu, the one imagined as an Atlantis of the Pacific, may never have existed. But myths do not endure for centuries or millennia simply because they are false. They endure because they capture something essential about our fears, our desires, and the patterns of history we have seen repeated. Viewed through the lens of the mosaic theory, Mu becomes less a single place and more a convergence point for many real events and cultures. The flooding of Sunderland, the migrations of seafaring peoples, the destruction wrought by Pacific earthquakes and tsunamis, the shared symbols and architectural styles that echo across thousands of miles. In this form, Mu is as real as the collective memory that created it. For believers, the absence of proof is not proof of absence. The oceans still hide vast tracts of unexplored terrain, and history is full of surprises. New archaeological discoveries have overturned long-standing assumptions before. It is not impossible that evidence might one day surface that forces us to rethink the deep past. For skeptics, the persistence of the Mu legend, despite the lack of physical evidence, is itself a lesson, one about the human appetite for grand narratives and our willingness to connect dots across space and time, even when the lines between them are uncertain. What both sides can agree on is that the story of Mu has shaped modern imagination in ways far beyond the original claims. It has inspired novelists, filmmakers, spiritual seekers, and amateur archaeologists. It has drawn attention to the rich traditions of Pacific and coastal peoples, sometimes misrepresenting them, but also sparking interest in their histories. In a way, Mu's greatest legacy may be that it encourages curiosity, prompting people to look at maps, study ancient cultures, and imagine connections that cross oceans. There is also the deeper, more personal appeal of Mu, the dream of a golden age. In Churchward's version, Mu was a place of peace, unity and enlightenment, where technology served humanity rather than dominating it, and where harmony with nature was not an ideal, but a lived reality. Whether or not such a place ever existed, it offers a vision of what might be possible. In that sense, Mu functions as a mirror. It reflects both our longing for a better world and our recognition that such worlds are fragile. The destruction of Mu, sudden, total, and irreversible, gives the legend its emotional weight. It is the reminder that nothing, no matter how great, is immune to change. Civilizations can rise to astonishing heights, but they are still bound by the same natural laws and environmental limits as any other living system. In this way, the story of Mu resonates with other great cycles of history: the fall of Rome, the collapse of the Maya, the decline of the Khmer Empire. Each leaves behind ruins and questions, and each carries its own lessons about resilience and vulnerability. From a modern perspective, the Mu legend can even be read as an environmental parable. Whether we imagine its destruction as a sudden cataclysm or a slow drowning, the cause lies in a breakdown of balance between humanity and the forces of nature. In our own time, as sea levels rise and climate patterns shift, the idea of a lost land swallowed by the ocean feels less like fantasy and more like a warning. Perhaps this is one reason the story has remained compelling. It speaks to the precariousness of our present as much as to the mystery of our past. In the vastness of the Pacific, there are still places where the line between myth and history blurs. Oral traditions recall events that science has only recently confirmed, such as volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and migrations across open water. It is entirely possible that fragments of truth lie hidden within the Mu narrative, not in the form of a single vanished continent, but in the memories of real lands lost, real people scattered, and real achievements forgotten. These fragments may never